Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor back, and I'm riled up because in the last 10 minutes I've been having a little pre-show conversation with our wonderful guest today, and he's gotten me excited because we've got some very cutting edge research to share. That is, oftentimes cutting edge research can be like, oh, it's cutting edge, but it applies to 0.000% of the world. That is not at all the case here. Our guest is one of the top experts in the world in terms of celiac disease and gluten sensitivity, and he has just been all over the world doing research and working with dare I say, tens if not hundreds of thousands of people to understand these conditions. And he's here with us today to share not only the 101, just to get us familiar with these conditions, but also some amazing new findings that are coming out of the scientific community. So I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce you to our guest, Dr. Tom O'Bryan. Dr. O'Bryan, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
Well, Dr. O'Bryan, let's get started. Just 101 for our listeners. Let's start from the beginning, which is what do you do and why are you so passionate about it?
Good. What I do is travel the world lecturing to medical conferences, groups of healthcare practitioners of all types, acupuncturists, osteopaths, chiropractors, medical doctors. And then whenever I'm in a city lecturing at a medical conference, I often will, my staff will set up a lecture for free to the local gluten support group or celiac support group. So I talk a lot to the general public also. And whenever I speak in the general public arena, there's always one or two women who will start crying because they finally understand why they've had recurrent miscarriages and no one could explain it to them. They finally get it. So what we're going to talk about here today is just a jaw dropper for some people. Not everyone in the world, but for some people. So that's my thing. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is that, well, perhaps I'll start with a story. I got a call one day that my godmother was on the way to the hospital. I said, what's wrong? And they didn't know, some type of abdominal pain. And her health history, she was 82, and she had only been in the hospital for 2 natural childbirths and a car accident where she was in her 60s and broke a hip. She was in the hospital for a week. The only medication she ever took in her life was for a broken hip for about a year, pain medication. Never any meds at 82 years old. Every year she'd have a physical, and her doctor would say, Emily, you're as healthy as a horse, but you have to stop drinking. And that's because she had mildly elevated liver enzymes. And my Emily would say, I don't drink. And she didn't. And every doctor knows that you often get patients, when you do a blood test, they've got mildly elevated liver enzymes, no other indicator of a problem. And we just watch it and see if there's anything shows up. When you have mildly elevated liver enzymes are a measure of dead liver cells. And there's a normal number of cells we lose every day. So you make some, you lose some. The goal is that you're making as many as you're losing. That's the normal range on a blood test. You're making as many as you're losing. When you have mildly elevated liver cells, you're losing more cells than you're making. They rush her off to the hospital. They find out that she's got 4% of her liver functioning. The other 96% is sclerosed. It's all scabbed. It's dead tissue. And she never had any symptoms with this. But now you have an 82-year-old woman, and all the blood goes through the liver in the body. Now all the blood is going through 4% of the liver. Now those blood vessels handling the 4% of the liver, those blood vessels are having to handle 100% of the blood. So what happens to a blood vessel that's only supposed to handle 4%? Now it's handling 100%. It bursts. That's internal hemorrhaging. Oh, severe pain. They rush her to the hospital. They find out, and they do emergency surgery. They save her life. I call my cousin, her daughter, and say, have the doctor do this blood test. Transcontaminase and deaminated lipids, because that's the blood test for celiac disease. My cousin said, well, why would we do that? And I said, it might have contributed to your mom's problem. So I didn't hear anything, but my godmother had 6 more emergency surgeries in the next 8 weeks. Excuse me, a total of 6. 5 more in the next 8 weeks. In 2 months, she had 6 emergency surgeries because the blood vessels keep bursting. What can you do? You can't give an 82-year-old woman a new liver. Finally, they say, Emily, go home. Make your peace. Your liver's paper thin. We can't do any more surgery. She said, how much time do I have? We don't know, 2 weeks, 2 months. It'll be quick. So that's when I flew to Pittsburgh to say goodbye to my godmother. You ever said goodbye to someone that's known you longer than you've known you? You know, I mean, it was not easy. I stayed 3 days. And back up for a minute. In the middle of that 2 months with the surgeries, I called my cousin and said, Cindy, what happened on the blood test? Oh, the doctor said you're probably a nice man, but you really don't know what you're talking about. So they didn't do the blood test. So I get to Pittsburgh, and my godmother was in the living room one morning. I wake up early, and I went out in the living room. She was there, and she couldn't sleep. So I had her lay down. I drew her blood. I brought a barrel needle tube. I drew her blood. I called the lab, said, come get this blood right away. They did, and she's a celiac patient. Now, I would have liked to have told that hepatologist, the liver specialist, the surgeon who saved her life, he's a fabulous surgeon, Doctor, did you ever read the Journal of Hepatology? Did you read the article called The Liver and Celiac Disease, where they say that, this is from Mayo Clinic, every patient who has abnormal liver biopsy and they can't find a reason for it, meaning at Mayo Clinic, they take out a piece of liver, they look at it under a microscope, they can't tell what's wrong. Every one of those patients reverse on a gluten-free diet. Every one of them. And that 50% of adults and 46% of children, when first diagnosed, have mildly elevated liver enzymes, and that may be the only presentation. Did you read that study? Well, of course you didn't. That's why you didn't do the blood test. So I drew the blood. My godmother was a celiac patient, and I had a meeting with them. And I said, Aunt Emily, I don't know how much time you'd have. They say 2 weeks, 2 months. I don't know. But I can promise you're going to feel better if you don't eat any more gluten. And they said, okay. I showed them the article. I had my laptop with me. I showed them the article from Mayo Clinic that this is a likely contributor to what happened to them. So she didn't live 2 weeks. She didn't live 2 months. She lived a year and a half. A year and a half. And when I give this presentation to doctors and seminars, I say, what had to change in terms of the integrity of those blood vessels, where the blood vessels burst 6 times in 2 months? All of a sudden, they stopped bursting. How many changes had to occur? And no one knows, because no one's ever studied this. But she lived a year and a half, and she had no pain whatsoever. In the midst of there, she developed cancer. And she called one day and said, Tony, I've got cancer. I said, I know. She said, how do you know? And I said, it's very common. Why didn't you tell me? Well, what for? There's no reason to tell you this. What should I do? I said, I don't know, but I researched it for her. I took 2 days to research it, and I got back to her and said, Aunt Emily, there's no study that shows you'll live a day longer. You'll likely get very sick from the chemotherapy and the radiation. You'll lose your hair, and you'll just feel terrible. It's up to you. I'll support you, whatever you want. So she didn't do it. She said, because her projected lifespan was 2 hours. 2 hours to 2 weeks anyway. She could die at any time. Finally, after a year and a half, they called me and said, I was talking to her regularly, but they called me and said, any day now. And I flew immediately back to Pittsburgh. My godmother weighed 53 pounds. You know, the cancer had eaten away at her, but she didn't have any pain, just chronic fatigue from all this. But so, you know, this is hard. It's hard to talk about because I still feel it. You know, I put my head on her lap. I was sitting at her bedside and she's stroking my hair, and I still feel it whenever I talk about it. I'm sobbing. This is my godmother who's just withered away. And I lift my head up and I look her in the eye, and tears are running down my cheeks. She's got tears running down her cheeks, and she says, thank you, Tommy. Thank you. And she had a year and a half. And then she got this fire in her eye, Jonathan, and she said, you tell him. You tell him. And I said, I will, Aunt Emily. I will. So I travel the world, and I just want people to be aware that if you have this problem, it's going to kill you. And you may think on the death certificate your father died of a heart attack, like mine, but it was a heart attack secondary to gluten sensitivity, or liver cancer, as my godmother's death certificate said. But it's liver cancer secondary to gluten sensitivity, or Alzheimer's, or seizures, or rheumatoid arthritis, or diabetes, or psoriasis. And the list goes on and on and on, that for some people, wherever your genetic weak link is, you know, you pull at a chain, it breaks at the weak link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end. It's your heart, your liver, your kidney, your spleen. Wherever your weak link is, that's where it's going to show itself when you pull at the chain too much. And how do you pull at the chain? Eating a food that your body can't digest, causing inflammation, causing intestinal permeability, aka the leaky gut, triggering the development of autoimmune conditions, tissue damage from the autoimmune conditions, tissue destruction, and eventual symptoms, and then eventual diagnosis, and then eventual mortality. That's the sequential order of what happens to one of the most common triggers in the world today that people just don't know about.
Dr. O'Brien, I so appreciate you sharing this story, and it is pretty common in my experience for individuals who are as passionate as you are, and as I know I am, about proper nutrition and the impact that food can have on lifestyle, to have that. While we have a scientific basis for everything, and while science is our life, when we see the real impact that the quality of what we put into our body has on the quality of our lives and the lives of those we love, like this is about way more than numbers on scales, or way more about who's right or wrong in nutrition debates. This is about life and death. And to that point, Dr. O'Brien, we're talking about gluten here, and we're talking about, therefore, wheat and these things which are so common in our culture. I can imagine you must get so fired up when you hear the mainstream media's message, which they beat into our heads every day, of, oh, everything in moderation. It's about moderation, isn't it, Dr. O'Brien?
I nailed that one in my summit, which I'll tell you about in a couple of minutes. I nailed it. I spoke to the world's leading immunologist in the field of autoimmunity. He's at Tel Aviv University. His name's Dr. Yehuda Schoenfeld. And I asked that question about the concept of a rotation diet, meaning a little bit in moderation. And the answer was, your body makes memory cells when you're allergic to a food, when you have an immune reaction to a food. It's just like a vaccination to measles. You get a shot of the bug measles. Your immune system says, what's this? This is not good for me. And you build an assembly line that starts producing soldiers. They're called antibodies against measles. Those measles antibodies are going everywhere, destroying the measles from the vaccination you got. When all of those measles bugs are destroyed, there's a general that overviews all this, General Measles, and General Measles turns off the assembly line. You should not have any measles antibodies in your bloodstream right now, unless you've been exposed. But if you're ever exposed again, General Measles just has to flip the switch, and you start making the antibodies. It doesn't have to build the assembly line. That's why if you go to Africa, you need vaccinations months and months and months ahead of time. But if you go back to visit 10 years later, you just need a booster shot 2 weeks before you go. Everyone knows about a booster shot because General Measles is already there. If you have a sensitivity to gluten, you get General Gluten, who's there the rest of your life. It's called a memory B cell. So to think that you can have a little gluten once in a while is like saying you can have a little measles once in a while. It's okay. It's not going to kill you. But the answer is yes, it may. You just can't do that. It's telling patients what they want to hear for comfort as opposed to talking from the science.
Dr. O'Brien, what do we have to do? I mean, this point is such a critical point, because as long as we're trapped in these calorie myths, and a calorie is a calorie, then these conversations about gluten don't get the attention they deserve, because we're just like, oh, well, it's just calories, so what is just eat less? And clearly that's like saying to someone, the way to avoid lung cancer is to smoke less. Well, that's not true. The way to avoid lung cancer is to not smoke. There's no such thing as smoking in moderation. So in understanding the acuity and the severity of what gluten-containing edible products can do to us, do you see a future where we give up this myth of moderation and just accept the science, which seems quite clear?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. There's more and more science coming out every day. And the term I use is, you can't be a little pregnant. You can't have a little gluten. If you have the sensitivity, and the science is very clear about it, and the studies say time and time again, they say it's a permanent sensitivity, intolerance to gluten. It's permanent. It's not lifelong. It's not chronic. It's permanent. And that's the word that the researchers use. Could they say it any clearer? But the clinicians, our doctors they don't quite get it themselves because many of them don't want to give up their ding dongs and their blueberry muffins and whatever else they're eating because it's a comfort food that we've all grown up on. They say it in a way to their patients, interpreting what their belief system. This is not about believing in gluten sensitivity. You don't believe or not believe in gluten sensitivity. You do the blood test and you find out. Let me give you an example of the shocking nature of this. This paper just came out in the American Journal of Psychiatry. In Sweden, they've got socialized medicine. They've got records on everyone. And for 30 or 40 years, I'm not sure how long, 30 or 40 years, they've been taking a blood spot at birth of the baby's blood, the fetal blood, and they put it on a card, they let it dry, and then they store it. So they've got records on millions and millions of people. They went back and they looked about these blood spots, and did the baby's blood have antibodies to gluten, to the protein in gluten? Now, mom, about the eighth month, the third trimester, mom's body, when she's pregnant, starts passing some of her antibodies down to the baby through the blood. So the baby has, it's called IgG antibodies, mom's antibodies in the baby's blood. Why? Okay, baby, here's some antibodies to our cat. It's a nice cat that you're going to come home to. Your immune system doesn't have to get worried about it. Here's a few antibodies. Or we live in the woods, and there's mold outside because the leaves are decaying. Here's a few antibodies to the mold. You don't have to react to it. Just have a few antibodies to protect you. That's what mom's IgG antibodies do, is prime the fetus for the world that it's about to come out into, to protect it. Great thing to do. So they looked at these IgG antibodies in the fetal blood at birth, and they're all from the mom. The baby doesn't start making them until a couple months down, and then they begin a couple months after birth. What did they find? Those mothers in the top 10% of IgG antibodies to the protein in wheat in the baby's blood at birth, those children were 70% more likely to develop schizophrenia as an adult 30 to 40 years later. If the mother was in the top 5%, not 10%, but the top 5% of antibodies, meaning a whole lot of those antibodies, their offspring were 240% more likely to develop schizophrenia 30 to 40 years later as an adult. This just came out. The title of the paper is Maternal Antibodies to Dietary Antigens and Risk for Psychosis in Offspring. We're all looking at this going, oh my goodness, what does this mean? It means that if mom has a sensitivity to gluten, it appears to impact on the development of the brain and the nervous system in the baby, which may not show for 30 or 40 years. And I've been talking about this for the last 3 weeks in my seminars. So then I stop and I look at the doctor and say, so what do you do with this? What do you do with this information? Here's what you do. Every pregnant woman gets checked for antibodies to gluten. If they have the antibodies to gluten, you take them off gluten for the rest of the pregnancy, just to be safe. You err on the side of safety. You don't have to believe or not believe. This is what the immune system is doing. Here's the result for some of these offspring 30 to 40 years later. Get the gluten out of the pregnant woman's diet, at least during the pregnancy. That's common sense. And that's the world of gluten sensitivity, Jonathan, and how it may impact on you.
And Dr. O'Brien, if nothing else, when we see that there is a substance that has this severe of a reaction to this many people, it can hopefully serve as the spearhead of a movement, which is just because something is found on your supermarket shelf and not in your supermarket pharmacy doesn't mean that it cannot impact your body completely independent of the calories it contains in ways and in negative ways and cross-generationally that we are only beginning to understand. And to just say, oh, we'll just eat less and exercise more and everything in moderation. And these opinions are truly not only scientifically bunk, but can be deadly. Is that fair?
Jonathan, that's a very fair summary. The concept of eating less, yes, obesity is a major epidemic. It is the primary epidemic in our world today. And yes, for a large percentage of those people, it is calories, but for a higher percentage, it's not. So eat less is not the primary recommendation to get rid of obesity. And exercise more. Everyone should be using their body, of course. That makes perfect sense. And moderation? Absolutely not. What kind of archaic nonsense is that? Excuse me, but it's nonsense. Now, this study that just came out in the American Journal of Psychiatry, it'll be years before our doctors understand this. Years before it becomes common knowledge. This is just buried in a psychiatry journal. How many general practitioners are going to read this? Or pediatricians? Or obstetricians? It's not going to happen because it's in the American Journal of Psychiatry.
Absolutely. And this is, Dr. O'Brien, I'm so happy that we can share this with our listeners because, over here at the Smarter Science of Slim, we are quite anti-starch. We do not believe that we should be spending our stomach real estate being filled with starch, and we'd much rather have much more nutrient-dense foods. But clearly, we've only scratched the surface here, and this is a very big topic, which has a very big impact on a big percentage of the population. And I know you've got some big things coming up in terms of spreading the word about this. So just to wrap up the show today, what can we expect from you next in terms of raising awareness?
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. As you can tell, I've got a little juice on this. My godmother told me to do this, and I've decided that I am going to move the needle of recognition that for some people, sometimes this is a major problem and they don't know it. So I've interviewed 29 of the world's experts. These are the very top people in the field that some of them have never been interviewed. And I've interviewed them about their area of expertise in this world of gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. And I've interrupted them often. I've prepped them. And I said, I may interrupt you. So they're talking. I said, Professor, excuse me, did you just say yes? Does that mean yes? So would that mean yes? Do you hear that, people? Here is what this professor just said. And so I do the interpretation for the general public. I'm airing all of these interviews online at no charge. It's completely free. There's no hooks. There's nothing being sold. I just want the knowledge out there. The website is, I believe, did you say you're going to post it so that people can get the website?
Absolutely, yeah. Folks, just go to the show notes for the show and you can get all the information there.
That's fabulous. Thank you. It's called the Gluten Summit. And it's going to air November 11th through the 17th. Everything's free. I've got world-class nutritionists who tell us, how do you order in a restaurant? Here's a clue. How do you order in a restaurant? Jackie Carr from Montreal. She's a celiac. I said, Jackie, so you're a sensitive celiac, aren't you? Yes. If I have an exposure for 3 or 4 days, I'm suffering. Well, you're a single woman. Yes. You go out to restaurants. Yes. How do you feel safe going to restaurants? Oh, that's easy. When I go to a restaurant, I ask for the owner. And I immediately introduce myself and say I'm a sensitive celiac. To avoid a 911 incident in your restaurant, will you make sure? And I just started laughing. That's brilliant. It's just brilliant. So it's little pearls, how to send your kids to school with lunches that are healthy and tasty, and the other kids are going to want to eat your kids' lunch. All of our nutritionists gave their pearls in these interviews because I asked the questions to pull the pearls out. And that's going to air November 11th and 17th. It's all free, and we hope everyone will check it out and tell their friends about it.
Well, brilliant. And I know, listeners, that in the meantime, please hop over to Dr. O'Brien's website, which is thedr.com. I'm not sure how he was able to get that domain name, but that is pretty awesome. It's THED as in dog, R as in Richard.com. His name, again, is Dr. Tom O'Brien, obviously a very passionate and wonderful soldier in this war against nonsense. So, Dr. O'Brien, thank you again so much for sharing your passion and knowledge with us today. And I'm so excited for everyone to learn even more at your upcoming summit.
Jonathan, thank you for the opportunity.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this wonderful and potentially life-saving conversation as much as I did. Our wonderful guest, again, Dr. Tom O'Brien. Check him out at thedr.com. Also, check out the show notes for more information about his upcoming summit. And please remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter exercise smarter, and live better. Chat with you soon.